Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Hope, Health, and Healing with Chef Mark Wright as we continue our journey through his book, Healing Our Community, One Recipe at a Time. Today, we're going to finish part 1 of his book, and we're talking about some very sensitive subjects. I want to invite Mark back. Mark, how are you?
Hey David, what's going on? Good to be here. Good to be with you.
Oh man, it's always a pleasure seeing you. I see you're wearing your new shirt, Healing Our Community. You got the new shirt with the reset button. I see that on the TV.
Yeah, man, this is my new concept, Healing Our Community Reset. It gives you an opportunity to reset your life every day.
Amen, man. I'm excited. So listen, today we're going to be talking about some sensitive stuff. Today we're going to be diving in to some things that we're actually, unfortunately, dealing with right now in society. And I believe that's probably why. But again, this show is about going into the mind of the author and figuring out why is it that Mark decided to put this. You know, when I first read, if you haven't seen episodes 1 through 4, I mentioned that I thought this was going to be a cooking book. And now there is some amazing recipes in this book, but this book really tackles a lot of different issues from social to community to politics to a lot of different things, because Mark wanted everyone to know that he is literally sharing with you all the ingredients that he believes as an author that can make a difference in healing our community and of course the world. Right, Mark? Am I correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Amen. Well, listen, let's talk today. We're going to start. We have some top subjects. I mean, the first one was we talked about drug abuse and addictions. So I want to know from you, what was your mindset when you started thinking about, I want to include this in the book?
Right, David. So, at the last part of part 1 of the book, right, we talk about some other factors, and these other factors were like some of the hidden factors, some of the hidden reasons, some of the hidden factors that actually affect our community, right? So we're talking about drug abuse and homelessness and incarceration, rehabilitation, and all that kind of stuff. But people don't look at those are factors that actually affect our community in a very negative way, right? The effects of illicit drugs and drug abuse and addiction, in our community cannot be understated. This is considered a chronic disease. According to the CDC, right, we've got about 70,000 deaths per year in this country relating to illicit drug use and abuse, right?
Correct.
And in Florida, where we are, we are a little above the national average, right? And the reason I actually want to put this particular topic in the book is to show exactly how much it affects our community, right? We're talking about impaired learning. We were talking about impaired judgment in terms of decision making. Illicit drugs put increased stress on our bodies. It impairs memory and behavior. So drug use and abuse in our community should be a concern for all of us, right? We got to look at, particularly in protecting our teens, is in terms of our school systems, right? The average age of starting drugs and alcohol in this country is between the ages of 9 and 10. That's pretty early, right?
Very young.
And according to Natural High, which is a nonprofit organization that is kind of dedicated to providing statistics about drugs and alcohol in teens, there's actually no strategy in terms of how we can tackle this problem. So drug use and abuse, I mean, if we have our kids starting at the age, I should say, as early as 9 and 10 to, and between the time they get to age 13, they're already
addicted.
Drug addicts. Just think about the delinquent.
Correct.
And the delinquency that we are instituting in our communities, right? All these people who are kind of being learning impaired and not able to make proper decisions for their friends and families, and have memory, behavior, and dysfunction. This is what is growing up in our community. That's why I actually want to put it there to show the impact.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to share a little bit of a story with the audience today. What's really interesting, you talked to here in the book about, addiction being preventable, and of course, it goes back to community. It goes back to teachers, parents, family members, everyone collaborating to make sure that they look for signs of young children that are going through that, and you write that in the book as well. And we're going to talk about homelessness next, but I want to kind of share the story. It was interesting because I've shared this with some of my clients. About 30% of my women clients that I do life coaching for, they've literally gone through drug abuse, addiction, or some kind of body imaging, anorexia, bulimia, things like that. Some of them also take pills and things like that. So I've had a lot of experience listening to my clients tell me about these things. But I remember my mother, Mark, my mom, and I remember my mom says, as a psychologist, she used to donate her time to this place in Puerto Rico called Hogar Crea, and it was men and women that basically had gone through, they were either homeless and they were displaced. And it was interesting because my mom used to share these stories, and I think that's what made an impact on me, is that she would share these stories of these men that looked like models, and then because of drug or alcohol or anything like that, they lost their families, they lost teeth, they lost everything. They would look like it was like a night and day, but it was the opposite. It was a transformation picture, but not the way you want. It was the opposite. And I think as a young kid, like you were talking about 9 and 10, it was those years before I left Puerto Rico to go to the United States, that to go to Texas, that I felt like my mom, because of that experience, it did impact me a lot. And I always I think that's one thing as adults that we could do, is to share these stories, or maybe share, places like this that kids can go and actually witness for themselves. And I think that made an impact on me. And that also talked about, you go next into homelessness, and we talk about the mental, the social, and emotional effects on our community. And I always say that the mental part of it is, I think, what we're dealing with a lot right now. And I wanted to know your point, because when it comes to homelessness, it's not that these men or women are able to function. Sometimes it's a mental thing, that they're not able to function in the world. And but I wanted to know why you wrote in this book, why you took the time to talk about homelessness and these kind of effects.
Right. So, again, the book is about healing our community, right? So if we're going to heal our community, we have to look at all the factors that would actually affect healing, health, and longevity, right? And just like drug abuse, homelessness is a big issue in our community, in our country. If you were to break down statistics, like 17 out of every 10,000 persons in this country, are homeless, right? We've got over 500,000 homeless people in this country, right? And we've got like 35% of that, which is about over 200 and something of those are unsheltered. That means they're on the streets, right? I mean, there are only so many housing facilities that can account for the amount of homeless that we have here. But then we think about the effect of the amount, that large percentage of people that we have on the street. Just think of what that is actually doing to our community. Then we have families that are on the street, and think of what that actually does to our community. But what I wanted to underscore there is that people have a lot of stigma against people that are homeless, right? And so I wanted to highlight the tons and tons of litany of reasons that can cause people to become homeless. Many of it is not any of their own doing. We have a situation where people don't have enough affordable housing. They might be victims of a divorce or some kind of domestic abuse situation. Evictions. PTSD is a big factor in this country why people, we will talk about veterans later on, but I mean, just in general, PTSD is a major factor why people will become homeless.
Correct.
And you're talking about foreclosure, you're talking about fire, natural disasters, mental illness, right? We live in a state where it's a hurricane state. So in a state where you get one natural disaster after another, especially during hurricane season, those are actually factors that have contributed to homelessness, right? Pandemic, just ask Mr. COVID, I mean, what effect that is having on people's budget and all kind of stuff. That would kind of result in homelessness, right? And we also have a lot of people with a lot of chronic illness, right? So we have people at all segments of our community that could become homeless, and is very, very easily. So we're looking at children, families, right? And people who move in and out of the justice system, the elderly, all these people that actually transit in and around our community, right? If you don't have stable environments for them, then that will actually affect how they will function, right? There's a study from Baylor University, and actually say that people don't become homeless when they run out of money. They become homeless when they run out of relationships, right? So that was one that kind of hit me kind of hard, right? Because think about the people who end up on the streets, the amount of breakdown that had to have happened to cause you to be on the streets, right? Is talking about a whole cycle. But those are just some of the reasons. But every individual in the community, right? We all have a responsibility, right? We all can do stuff, right? So in terms of addressing the homeless situation in your community and in our country, just don't turn a blind eye, and don't think that what have befallen them was something out of their own doing and it can happen to you. I mean, anyone can become homeless at any time, because it just takes one chronic or catastrophic illness or event in your life, and that can happen. So let's try to avoid being judgmental, right? And just try to figure out what some of the causes, and then how we can help.
Correct. And and I would say this, like it's interesting because you write there's a lot of information in here. You talk about how even solutions for homelessness. You're giving a lot of information as well, and not just volunteering, and also giving something tangible to a homeless person. If you don't want to give them money, give them food. My mom and me are always like that. We always give them food, and I partner with a lot of foundations. One of my friends has a foundation, and we give them clothing, and they shave their beard, and they shave their and cut their hair, at the holidays. So there's a lot of ways you could really help, but I think is understanding it, and I think that this is why I'm very just intrigued that you wrote this stuff, because I think it's going to open people's eyes in terms of being homeless is not just one thing. There's multiple things that can happen before you become homeless. But when we talk about relationships, like Mark said, I think is really interesting to understand that. It's like, not when we're young, we're like, hey, I'll sleep on my friend's couch. I'll sleep whatever. But when we get older, we don't let people in, and we don't let people know what we're battling. And that's everybody. And we all, little by little, have to be able to communicate that better. So we're not in a position where we kind of lose everything, correct? Because our relationships are a big part of it. And you move on to incarceration and rehabilitation. Oh, Mark, I mean, there's so many things that you can take out of this book, and I just wanted to kind of again say, I'm just very taken by this book. The more I read it and go through it in details, especially when we do the show and I go through the chapters again. And you were talking about incarceration, and you talk about children and parents, and how again, we always want to blame, right? We blame, okay, well, this is gonna because of my dad, this is his fault. It's like we never take ownership, but we know that we have the choice to change our our future. But sometimes we just go by our environment, again, our community, and we think this is okay. So tell me a little bit more about why you wrote about incarceration and rehabilitation.
Right. So this is another huge problem within our community, right? And as I label it, the harmful effects of mass incarceration, just look at some of the statistics here, right? We have about 324 million people in this country. We've got 2.3 million of those are incarcerated, right? Wow. So in terms of the world population, we only have 4.25% of the world's population, but account for 22% of the incarcerated, right? So that's about, as I mentioned, about 2 point something million people, right? So when you have large amount of parent age adults that are cycling through the prison and jail system, it negatively affect our community, right? Those are people who are the disciplinarians and the structure of the family, whether it's male or female. Like when you remove one of those structures from the family, it causes a lot of breakdowns, and that's what we see in our community today, right? Our justice system is so kind of bent on incarceration and not enough rehabilitation in terms of when these people, cycle through the system and they return to our community in terms of getting them slowly adjusted back to life in the community. That is a problem. But, just to underscore, right, how when you remove these adults from the community, right, it damages social network, it damages their ability for self-development, it damages social relationship, it damages, as I mentioned, the family structure, social structure, the friends, and it impair life expectancy, right? People who are cycling through the system, they are more likely to develop chronic illness and disease, which in effect kind of affect our community, right? When you cycle them through there and then they have to come back into the society, and then they're not able to be whole and wholesome people who can actually contribute to our community, right? There is where a major breakdown comes, and then you have because people are not sometimes able to function as they should. Many people, or I should say, many family members actually become victims themselves, right? There's a psychological strain, right? We're talking about kids, right? There's studies that actually show that kids whose parents cycle through the system, especially very often, have a lot of social behavioral problems. Like they're more likely to be suspended more often, like expelled from school, have problems subjecting themselves to the authority structure, like the teachers, and leaders in the community. As I mentioned, when you take out some of the authority structures from the home, you are causing a further breakdown in the community. And what something I also outlined there is that how this particular situation here has affected minorities on a greater proportion, right? Our minority population is about 30% of the population, but yet it accounts for 68%, almost 70% of the incarcerated. Out of that 2 million people, we got 1.5 million of those are minority. So the incarceration rates disproportionately affect inner cities, low income,
correct,
minority. That is why I put it in the book there, because I wanted to show how it affects our community. And when we are going to, in terms of rehabilitation, we have to ensure that inmates are properly rehabilitated to actually to be able to function back into our community, right? We have to take all that anger and rage and all the stuff that that is pent up there and challenge it into something positive. So when they come back out, they're able to be functional adults in the community.
Correct. And this is not, this is so, there's so many variables to what we're talking about. So we're not, there's no right answer for anything. Again, what I just think is intriguing is that Mark took the time to do some research and kind of educate everyone that's reading this book in what he thinks, or again, what society has in terms of numbers and things like that. You also talk about community policing, and you talk about it in a way where I thought it's really interesting how we're talking about it right now in society. But you talk about certain things that I thought was really intriguing, and one was community partnerships and adaptation, organizational adaptation with that policing in the community. And also you talk about solving problems together. But I think, Mark, the one thing, I know you talk about statistics and you put things in this book that are global or right now in terms of our nation. But, when we talk about these things, the biggest issue, I think, is that people have to be able to listen. People have to be able to listen to the other side and listen to why it is that their environment is like this, or things like are not as good, right? And I think that is the one thing that I think everyone right now needs to be able to listen to the other side instead of going against it. And you don't tackle something, you don't go into detail about your opinions. What you do is you share things that are able to be done to make it better. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And any other thing you want to talk about that chapter?
I know you pretty much framed it accurately there. So just think about what's happening in our community at the moment with police brutality, and you're just talking about listening to each other and empathizing. But we have a lot of systemic issues in our community. But the only way we can address them is if we understand, if we can check our history, and then we could understand, put our foot, in someone else's shoe and understand their point, right? And we were just talking about rehabilitation and incarceration, right? If you I was just saying, if you remove the authority structure, especially the male force factor in the family, now you are creating wayward kids that are more likely to get into confrontation with the police, right? So I'm thinking that if on both sides, if they're really able to listen and try to address some of those systemic issues, then they will probably more understand that, listen, some of these kids probably only need a father figure, or some of them, need other kind of discipline rather than the juvenile system, because they are growing up on their own. They're raising themselves, so they're adults as kids. So I think that whole listening, and you mentioned, embracing partnerships. Like when you partner with somebody, you are part of their team. It's not my way or the highway, you against me, or whatever. Partnership is where we kind of like pool our ideas and resources to actually make the situation better. And I think that's what community policing can actually do.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think a lot of it is if you've never had an experience, then there's really nothing you can even try to understand because you've never had an experience like that.
Right.
But when you do have an experience, I always try to explain to people, I think the best thing is think about it. If somebody, just in school, somebody is bullying you all the time, eventually you just believe that people like that are going to bully you all the time, no matter what race or color they are. And
Right.
but at the end of the day, I think it's more of really trying to understand an education. Listen, it's just we've talked about in this book for all the episodes. Everything's about education. I mean, even about health and wellness, and we talk about nutrition and we talk about foods, is about getting educated, is about learning about what something does and doesn't do. A lot of people are sick and they don't understand that it's because of their nutrition. And I know I'm switching subjects, but it's because this is actually a book that started with a chef that wanted to share about his, what he does for a living, but yet he took the time to half the book is about ingredients that have nothing to do with food. It's about different things in your own community, in your own atmosphere that you can do to change and educate others to heal a community with so many things. And that's why, Mark, again, I just give you props, man. Let's move on to taking care of our veterans, which I love because both of my parents are veterans. My father was in the Korean War, and my mom was a captain in the Army, in the United States Army. So I'm very proud of both of my parents. Both are veterans. And I got to tell you, man, even the funeral, my father's funeral, the veterans' funeral, was so emotional to me and so patriotic to me. I mean, it made me feel things that I've never felt before. And I just, to me, because it's one thing to say I'm defending the country, and another thing is to go to war for people you're never even going to meet. But yet you sacrifice your life, the one thing that, we all know we're going to die sometime, but you're sacrificing it for people that you'll never get to meet. So for me, veterans are so selfless. I'm just like, man, and it's very true. We got to take care of them, man. We really do. And what was your thought? Where's your mind at this when you wanted to write this chapter?
Right, because their importance, their selfless sacrifice, by putting, their lives on the line, and you were just mentioning that many of them, you will never get to meet them, they will never get to meet you, but that depth of selfless sacrifice, I mean, it cannot be understated, right? I look at them as the guardian of the galaxy because they go out there to put their lives on the line so that we can be safe here, right? So, I mean, there is, I think, for many veterans, there is, or people in the armed forces in general, there is an honor to serve, but I think for us, right, there's nothing like saying thank you for your service. Because that's all many of us will ever get to do when we see that uniform. If someone is actually stepping in the way, into harm's way, so you don't have to. But this selfless sacrifice, as I put there, it was not without consequence, right? I mean, I've met so many homeless veterans here. It's something. I mean, it kind of like tears you up because these are the people who actually made the sacrifice for us, and to see that sometimes we're not able to give them back what they deserve and ensure that they're well taken care of is just something, right? And we were just talking about those exposure is not without consequence because a lot of veterans become homeless because of stuff like PTSD, anxiety, and depressive disorder. They overuse drugs and end up being incarcerated. This part kind of had struck me because I didn't kind of equate veterans and being incarcerated, but it does happen because when adequate care is not administered, right? These people just become like anyone else. You'll be on the street, not able to get your medication or whatever in a wholesome, healing environment, and that kind of like had bothered me when I was actually writing this book, and I would go out and talk to like homeless people, and then I encountered, I wasn't even going to talk to vets. I encountered that they were actually vets. I was like, whoa, how do you end up here, But I mean, there's a whole litany of reasons that had accounted for that. But as I mentioned, all we have an opportunity to do, help when we can, support organizations that actually, support vets, and organizations that kind of look out for their well-being, right? There are tons of ways we can actually show our appreciation.
Amen. And for me, when I think of veterans, I think, again, it goes back to, if you, like for me, I grew up in a household where with two veterans. So I was able to listen to them talk about their story and what they sacrificed and people that died. My father used to tell me of people that died in his platoon and things like that. So I will tell you that, again, if you're not around that, you don't know. So again, you have to get educated and maybe go to a function and get to learn about what these veterans go through. In other words, to try to understand them and empathize with them more. And again, it goes back to your book, your vote, your voice. I love that. So again, we happen to be in an election. So yeah, listen, voting is not about just the president. I want to make sure I share this with people. Voting is about your community. Voting is about your own city or your own town. It's learning about what's going on. Mark, I'm glad you put it in, and we're not gonna go. It's only a small chapter, so you're gonna have to get the book. You can read what Mark wrote about it. But I will tell you this: that it's about learning about your community, what your community needs, and there's so many laws that are getting passed that people are not aware of. I mean, we could have a whole show about this. So, but as we're ending this episode, we're going a little longer, but I wanted to share because he finishes part one with spirituality and our community. And I felt like I want to make sure we talk about this before I finish. We're a little bit over, Mark, but tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that, on finishing with that.
Right. David, I mean, this part I wanted to use to summarize the entire part one, right? Remember early on we were talking about primary and secondary food, right? And we were mentioning that the primary food was one that wasn't actually on your plate. So when we talk about spirituality and our community, it's referred to as the cornerstone of our community, right? Our faith kind of helps us to connect meaning and purpose, right? That is what helps us cope with illness, suffering, transitioning, right? And regardless of how you define spirituality, whether it's through faith or through nature, right, there is something that is higher than us, right? It is like a calling of service to do something greater than ourselves, and that is our calling to using our faith to call us to this highest service of community service, right? Our faith is an integral part of who we are, right? It's nourishment for our soul, nourishment for our spirit. And I put a piece there that said it is really the source of our strength and the purpose of existence, right? In all this, if you can only find purpose, David, you talk a lot about finding your purpose, right? If you can only find our purpose in all of this, the whole thing, our own life and our own endeavor would have a new meaning. So whether you are a Christian, or Jew or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, right? Or you just practice spirituality, we all have a responsibility to building a stronger community.
Amen. Well, as we finish this episode, reading this book really gave me just more of the value of a friendship that I have with Chef Mark Wright, because one thing is to do business together and be able to partner together on certain ventures, but another thing is to call him my friend and my brother in Christ, and to really go in depth into getting to know his mind. And so I'm really truly grateful, and I hope that in these episodes you were able to actually get into the mind of the author. That's what this whole show is about. Hope, Health, and Healing is about that. Is I want to take you into the minds of the author and why they wrote what they wrote. But in this book, really, it meant even more to me because I got to know my friend in more of a deep way, and what he cares about, what he puts over many other things, and what he really truly believes about our community. And he also shares about how we can actually change our community. It's not just about nutrition, but it's about a lot of ingredients that he put together into this book. I'm so truly grateful. And again, when it comes to faith, I have to always say that I wouldn't be here without it. And I certainly believe that faith can go both ways. Having faith is believing in something. And if you believe in nothing, you're still having faith. You're just believing in nothing. That is still having faith. The definition of faith is just believing. So I will tell you that you are believing in something. But again, what is that something leading you to? And I will leave it with that. Again, there has been another episode of Hope, Health, and Healing. I will leave you with my message. Find hope, have faith, and live every day with a purpose. God bless you, and good night.